11. This is where the story started changing. No, they haven't made it to the promised land yet. They're close. They're closer at the beginning of chapter 11 than they are at the end of chapter 11. That's for sure.
All I can see here is we didn't cover this, that people were complaining.
That's what happened.
That seems to be the normal thing.
Well, it hasn't been so far. Not in Numbers. That was the first time they've complained. That was Numbers. Numbers chapter 11 is time number 1 at Taberah, and number 2 at Kibrot Hatava. Okay, you don't have to remember those names. The first rebellion was just a couple verses long, and we don't really know what they were complaining about. It just says they were complaining, and so the people got burned up. And so it was called Taberah because of the burning. Okay, sure. But most of chapter 11 was about what happens at Kibrot Hatava, which they complain about something specific. Do you remember what they complain about? What? They don't have any meat. They don't complain that they don't have food. They complain that they don't have meat. And so they're tired of manna, they say, and they miss the days when they had all these fresh fruits and vegetables and fish and meat. And they miss these things they had back in Egypt. Now, do you remember who started the complaint? What group of people started the complaint? Yeah, the rabble among them, the mixed multitude, depending on your translation. I like rabble, that sounds nice. They're the troublemakers. And it seems that this term refers to some of the foreigners who had left Egypt with them, whether they were Egyptian themselves or other slaves, from some other group of people. But it seems like these are the ones who kind of start bringing these things up, and they get everybody fired up, and then the children of Israel come to Moses and they say, we miss these days, right? And so that's this rebellion. It's the second rebellion. Numbers chapter 12 is about the third rebellion. Now this one's kind of interesting because there's two explanations that the text gives for why they were upset. So we start off in verse 1. It says, "Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses." This is the first reason. "Because of the Cushite woman whom he had taken as a wife, for he had taken a Cushite woman." Does anyone have a translation that doesn't say Cushite? Ethiopian? We don't know exactly what Cushite means, but it usually means Ethiopian. So we feel it's pretty safe to assume that it means Ethiopian here. And they said, "Has Yahweh indeed spoken only through Moses?" Notice this is a second reason, and it is not related to the first reason. Has Yahweh indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? And Yahweh heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than any man who was on the face of the earth. Suddenly Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron and to Miriam, "You three come out to the tent of meeting." So the three of them came out. Then Yahweh came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the doorway of the tent. And he called Aaron and Miriam. And then both came forward. And he said, "Hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, Yahweh, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my household. With him I speak mouth to mouth, indeed clearly, and not in riddles. And he beholds the form of Yahweh. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant, against Moses?" So the anger of Yahweh burned against them, and he went away. But the cloud withdrew from over the tent, and behold, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. Then Aaron said to Moses, "O my Lord, I beg you, do not place the sin on us in which we have acted foolishly, in which we have sinned. O do not let her be like one dead whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes from his mother's womb." And Moses cried out to Yahweh, saying, "O God, heal her, I pray." But Yahweh said to Moses, "If her father had but spit in her face, would she not bear her dishonor for 7 days? Let her be shut up for 7 days outside the camp, and afterwards she may be received again." So Miriam was shut up outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not set out until Miriam was received again. Afterward, however, the people set out from Hazerot and camped in the wilderness of Paran. So this third stop is a place called Hazerot. And this incident happens involving Miriam and Aaron. Now it's kind of funny. If you're reading in English, you read chapter 12, verse 1, and it makes it sound like Miriam and Aaron are in this, pretty much together. And Miriam and Aaron went and they complained, right? Well, maybe a better translation of this would, the way it's worded in the original, would be Miriam, along with Aaron, spoke against Moses. Miriam is the one who's really bringing this whole thing out. And that kind of explains why she's the one who receives the punishment and Aaron's just left standing there awkwardly, right? So what is it that's actually happening here? Like I said, we get two explanations of why they're upset. Now, what's interesting is that the explanation in the text references his wife. But what they say is about his role as the leader of the people. So which one is the excuse for the other? It's hard to know. Is Miriam for some reason upset about his wife, and so she's bringing this complaint about Moses' authority as kind of an excuse, or is that what they're really upset about, and the thing that's really riled them up at this particular moment is the thing with his wife? I don't know. It's hard to say, right? Because it doesn't really tell us. We just kind of get both explanations here. So I really just want to go ahead and deal with both of these individually. The first one.
The first thing I read about, first time I read this, I took it as Moses was marrying outside the Jewish people, which is kind of a strange thing. Now, whether it was right or wrong, that was a question. And they brought up that, and there was jealousy with Miriam and Aaron in relation to saying that maybe Moses shouldn't be in charge for one reason or another.
Yeah.
But one of their reasonings is the Cushite woman, which
well, we're gonna.
He had descended
Yeah, we're gonna talk about kind of the possibilities of what's going on here, because it is a little difficult to decipher what's happening, and you kind of have to read between the lines, because we're getting very little detail here, as far as what's going on. The first question is who this woman is. Does Moses have? Before we read this text, do we know about Moses' wife? Yeah, who's his wife? Do you remember her name? It's so close, so close. It's Zipporah. Zipporah. And the Greek spelling of it becomes Sephora, like the makeup store. So that's where that name comes from. So Zipporah, Sephora. Yeah, so that's his wife. Now, what's her nationality?
Midianite.
She's Midianite. So the Midianites live out in this region. We know they live out in this region. They possibly also live in this region up here, okay?
But she's definitely a descendant of Abraham.
Yes, the Midianites are related to the sons of Israel, very distant descendants, but they are related going back to Abraham. Midian was one of Abraham's sons through his second wife Keturah. So when Moses comes in, all the way back in Exodus chapter 2, when Moses flees from Egypt and he goes into the land of Midian and he meets Jethro and he marries his daughter, right? That's Zipporah, and they're Midianites. Now, where's Ethiopia? I don't know if you know your geography, but modern Ethiopia is down here. Ancient Ethiopia is just like right here. It's a lot closer. But Ethiopia is definitely not Midian, okay? So, there are different explanations of what's going on. Possibility one, basically there's two possibilities, which I'm going to say a lot tonight. There's a few possibilities. Possibility one is that Zipporah is being called Cushite for whatever reason. I don't know. And if that's true, it probably doesn't mean Ethiopian. But if that was the case, he's been married to her for how long? 40-something years by now? Because he married her when he first fled Egypt at the age of 40. He's now 80-something. So
you're saying that Zipporah is being considered a Christian?
No, I'm saying this is one of the possibilities for reading the text, is that, because this is the only passage we ever hear about him having a wife other than Zipporah. So if it's the same woman, we kind of end up with this question mark of, okay, if it was bothering them all this time, why are they just now saying something, right? Plus, it just doesn't really make sense that she'd be called a Cushite if she's not from the land of Cush, Ethiopia. So probably it just means Moses had two wives. That's the second possibility, is that there's another wife. Now, this connects with why Miriam is upset. Okay, so I want you to bear with me. There's an old tradition that she is from Ethiopia. She's a different wife from Zipporah, but that he married her before he married Zipporah, or he married her right when he came back to Egypt after coming out of, coming out of exile. And the reason that this tradition exists is that it was common for the pharaohs and the royalty to marry Ethiopian women because they were considered exceptionally beautiful. And so if this is what's going on, it's possible Miriam isn't upset because she is disgusted by her being a foreigner, but because she's jealous of her. It's possible. If that's the case, the way the two complaints could tie together is that Moses gets this special privilege that he's given all this, prestige, and he's allowed to have this special foreign wife, and the rest of us are, we've got these rules. We're not allowed to marry foreigners. Why does Moses get all these special exemptions? So it's possible that what Miriam's upset about is that Moses seems to be getting some special treatment. I don't know. Yeah, like I said, theoretically they've been married for at least 40 years. I said not at least. It would be 40 years just about 40 years, maybe a little less, depending on exactly when he marries her, when he leaves Egypt. But it's very possible that she's died. That's very, very possible. So I don't know that it's not really that big of a deal, really, which wife she is. The reason I'm spending some time on this is it does affect a little bit how you read the rest of the situation and how you understand why Miriam is so upset. Now, in the 21st century, our instinctive reading is pretty basic, which is Moses just married a black woman or a foreigner, and Miriam is upset about this for some kind of prejudicial reason. Now, that's with 21st century eyes, and it would be wrong to have that kind of attitude, but that's probably not exactly what's happening here, because people married foreigners all the time. That wasn't considered, it wasn't as big of a cultural issue, and it hasn't been embedded in their minds to not marry foreigners yet, and it won't be for a very long time. The Israelites very famously marry a lot of foreigners. In fact, that's one of the problems, is that they keep marrying foreigners. But I think maybe where this ties in is in connection with this. When we look back at the second rebellion, I think maybe this is how it ties in, whether he's married this woman recently or a long time ago. Back in chapter 11, you've got the mixed multitude, or the rabble, 11 verse 4, who were among them. So right now, the Israelites might be looking at all the foreigners and thinking, you're the ones who are responsible for this. You're the ones who have, brought this. You stirred everyone up. You're really the reason this destruction just happened, right? Now, what's interesting, God is very consistent that he tells the children of Israel to be very careful in their interactions with foreigners, and when they come into the land of Canaan, not to intermarry with the Canaanites, not to get involved with paganism and with pagan people. But that's not the only aspect of Israel's relationship with foreign nations. Now remember, everything that we read about we need to tie back to the promises made to Abraham. Now, in the promises made to Abraham, was there anything said about foreigners? It doesn't use the word foreigners, but is there anything said about foreigners?
With bless all nations.
Okay.
But that's the only thing I can think.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. Let's look at that super quick. Genesis 12. He says this in a couple words in verse 3. He says, God says to Abram, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. And if you look back at the last line of verse 2, it has this more generic, I will bless you, I'll make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. So what's embedded in this promise is not just that God is going to bless Abram, and later on God extends that promise to his descendants. God is going to bless Abram, he's going to bless his descendants, but the purpose is then so that they will be a blessing to others, right? Has Moses expressed that thought before? We talked about this just a couple chapters ago. Moses invited someone to join them. Do you remember who it was? Yeah, he invites Jethro to join them. Is Jethro one of the sons of Israel? No. Is he part of God's chosen people?
No, not really.
No, he's not. But what Moses says, and this is just back in chapter 10, he says almost the exact same thing. He says in Numbers 10, verse 29, we are setting out to the place of which Yahweh said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will do you good, for Yahweh has promised good concerning Israel. In other words, God is going to bless us, and so we are going to bless you. And then he says again in verse 32, if you go with us, whatever good Yahweh does for us, we will do for you. So Moses has this understanding and this mindset that their relationship with foreigners doesn't mean that they can abandon their relationship with God, but he does have this attitude that they're supposed to be a blessing to these other people. Now, this Cushite woman.
Well, back to Jethro.
Sure.
Jethro, there's some extenuating circumstances here. Sure, he's Moses' father-in-law. He's also the priest of Midian. And he has knowledge of God. He's not what do you call it? Pagan, yeah, I think. He's not a pagan. So
Right.
But, yeah, he's not an Israelite, so the land promise doesn't necessarily fall to him. And he knows that. But he has a lot of wisdom that will serve the Israelite nation as they march. But it's not like he's necessarily taking in a complete foreigner who is a pagan who doesn't know God. This is something extremely different.
Well, there are going to be, it hasn't been dwelt on heavily in Leviticus. If a foreigner wants to incorporate themselves fully into the community, they can't just, show up and continue in their pagan ways, right? They have to acclimate, and if they're men, they have to submit to circumcision. In the case of Jethro, he's probably, that's probably not an issue for him because he's a descendant of Abraham from another line. But he is still a foreigner, and so that aspect is still being represented, even if it is in a very small way. And we do see that in the foreigners who are allowed to travel with them, even if they're not always, behaving themselves. All of that said, what is it that Miriam is truly upset about here? Is she upset that Moses is allowed to have a foreign wife? Which is really an issue about Moses. Is she upset that the wife is a foreigner, which is an issue with the wife? You see that it's a small distinction, but it's big at, who you're really upset with. Is she upset at the wife or upset at Moses? I don't know. I don't know exactly what's happening.
I think it's the third one.
And what would the third one be?
The third one, she's just looking for an excuse to put Moses in his place.
Well, see, right, and that's what I was saying is, we've got the two explanations that are given here. I think I'm slightly inclined to believe that this is the real motive because it's the one that is only revealed by the narrator. The complaint about Moses not being the only voice is what comes out of their lips. I think my personal interpretation is that the narrator is telling us what's in their hearts, rather than, if it was the excuse, then I'd think that would be what they would voice. That is just my opinion, but I don't know. So, like I said, I wanted to address both of those. Either way, there's the point being, God nowhere says foreigners bad. He never says that. He gives them instructions on how to deal with foreigners carefully to avoid falling into paganism, but he never says that a person is bad or less valuable because of their national or family heritage. Anyway, moving on to the other issue at hand, which is Moses' relationship. They make a statement here. What is the statement that they make?
Moses is the most humble person on the earth.
Well, no, that's the one that the narrator makes in verse 2. Sorry, in verse 2. What do they say? They make two statements.
God speaks to them too, and just.
Yeah. So the first statement they make is, has God only spoken through Moses? Well, of course not. What happened in the previous chapter? Do you remember that? God sent his Spirit down, and 70 of the elders just prophesied publicly in the camp, right? So that's in recent memory. Has God only spoken through Moses? Well, of course not. Are Miriam and Aaron included in that? Well, probably not, because they're not the elders of the people, right? That's a different group. But they say, has God not also spoken through us? Now, what's the answer to that? Let's start with Aaron. What's a time that God spoke through Aaron? Yes. Now, what's funny about that is when that relationship is described, God says that Moses is going to be like God to Aaron. So Aaron gets to be the prophet. Aaron gets to speak to Pharaoh and announce the message. But even at that time, his authority is still subordinated to the authority of Moses. All the way back then. Which I say all the way back then, that was like, less than 2 years ago, right? So I'm sure it feels like a long time for them. But all the way back then.
But the thing is, within the hierarchy, Aaron is the high priest. Moses, in all actuality, doesn't even have a title. I mean, not that he needed one, but he doesn't have a title as far as he's not the king, he's not the. Moses is high.
Right. Moses is in the.
Aaron's the high priest, and Miriam, I'm not sure. I mean, being the sister of those two, I'm not sure
Okay, so Moses doesn't have like a particular title. He's just Moses, right? You know? And maybe that's how his big brother and big sister see him. You know, it's just Moses. You know, we remember back when we were kids standing on the riverbank looking at that little basket floating down the water, you know. I wonder if this is what they're thinking, right? What's the age difference between Moses and Aaron? It's 3 years. Aaron is 3 years older. We know that because when they go to Pharaoh, it says Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 years old. So Moses is Aaron's little brother. Miriam, she's the one that goes to Pharaoh's daughter and says, "Would you like me to go get a nurse for the baby?" So these are his older siblings. Yeah, she's the oldest. Then Aaron, then Moses. You can imagine the kind of jealousy that they're feeling. I wonder if this isn't a little bit like what you see with Joseph. You know, and we see this all through the Pentateuch. How many times does the oldest sibling end up on top? 0. It's 0. You can check. Every single time the age order, which was considered, you know, carved in stone, unchangeable across the world, every single time in the Pentateuch, it's flipped or subverted in some way. Going all the way back to Cain and Abel. Anyway, that's all very interesting, but that's getting away from our text. So they make this complaint. Now, Miriam, the only time I can think of Miriam speaking, does anyone know? What are you thinking of? Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of. That's Exodus chapter 15, verse 20, and this is after. Notice, after the song of Moses and the sons of Israel. Exodus 15 verse 1 has this whole big long song that it seems the men are singing. Okay, so they've got like a men's chorus that is all the people, and it's this long song. And then in verse 20, you have the women's chorus, like a call and response kind of thing. Verse 20, Miriam the prophetess. So here we read that she is a prophetess. Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took the tambourine in her hand. All the women went out after her with tambourines and with dancing. And Miriam answered them, like I said, call and response, "Sing to Yahweh, for he's highly exalted. The horse and his rider he's hurled into the sea." And it's a little funny to me. You know, Moses gets this whole long song and she gets like 2 little lines. But again, even here, her role as a prophetess and as a leader is still being subjected to Moses' rule. You see? So with both Aaron and Miriam, what they say is true. God has spoken by men other than Moses, including through Miriam and Aaron. But from the he's always been clear about their relationship, and they've always been clear on their relationship in this arrangement, you know, how it all works. Again, why exactly they picked this particular time to get upset, I don't quite know.
Moses marrying his foreigners is kind of like the church in the New Testament bringing in the Gentiles. She was a foreigner, a Gentile. And then the jealousy of Miriam and Aaron is like in the New Testament, the jealousy of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because the Gentiles now are part of the church now. And then the leprosy of Mary
If you didn't hear that, Wayne's bringing out a narrative parallel between what we see here happening with Miriam and Aaron's anger at a foreigner being brought in, to when, really it starts with Jesus, when Jesus starts, he includes, it's not like this is the main part of his ministry, but he includes in his ministry some foreigners. This is not a big part of his ministry. It really is not. His primary ministry is still to the Jews, but when he goes out to the Samaritans, or he involves himself with the people along the coast, so they would be more Phoenicians, he involves himself with these people, and the Jews become very upset because they have this strong nationalistic pride that they're the right people. And what Jesus prophesies to them is that this special relationship you have is going to be taken away from you, and it's going to be dispersed. Now you come into the book of Acts, and you see this happen even further when Simon shares the gospel with Cornelius, and then when Paul goes out and he comes into Greece, and he does something unprecedented. He's preaching the gospel to all of these Greeks who've never even heard of the law of Moses. So when he comes back to Jerusalem, they say, "You brought a foreigner into the temple." Well, that's not exactly true. He didn't bring a foreigner into the temple. But they say, "You brought a foreigner into the temple." Which sounds a lot like Miriam here, right? You brought a foreigner into our camp. Well, God shows what he thinks of both of these situations through consequences. With Miriam, it's the turning of her skin into... You'll notice there's kind of the irony of cursing her arm with leprosy. Is it just her arm, or is it? It is all of her. I'm thinking of when Moses does the thing. Yeah, she becomes it says leprous as snow, and most of the time that's understood to mean as white as snow, in contrast with this Ethiopian woman. There's some irony there, right? And
You left out Acts chapter 11, where Peter comes back after baptizing Cornelius' house, and he gets put on a short little trial almost, the church in Jerusalem.
yeah,
But again, he brings up God approved of these people. Just like he did with Moses here, God approved of them.
yes, yeah. Well, and you're right, and that's the whole point that I'm trying to make is this whole time going back to Abraham, the plan has always been to pull the Gentiles. I say Gentiles; they're not Gentiles until the New Testament, but to pull the nations in, right? It's always been to include the foreigners, whether they're close to home like Jethro, or whether they're less close to home like Cornelius the Italian, or Aristarchus the Greek. They're maybe a little farther off, but the plan has always been to bring them in and to include them. Okay, we've spent lots of time on that. I want to talk about Moses' relationship a little bit more. Relationship with God, not his wife. Okay, so Miriam and Aaron they've got this relationship with God too. They have a prophetic relationship with God. They have important role in their responsibility with God. Like you mentioned, Craig, Aaron's the high priest. Other than Moses, that's as high as it gets. And after Moses, that will be as high as it gets. There's going to be a king at some point. But is the king really higher than the high priest?
No,
Not in religious matters.
yeah, but God priest being the judge. He raises up somebody else.
Well, look at what he says here. He says, I've got prophets. I've got prophets. I can make prophets. If there's a prophet among you, I, Yahweh, shall make myself known to him in a vision. I shall speak with him in a dream. So how does God say he's going to communicate with prophets? Visions and dreams. Is that how he communicates with Moses? Has Moses ever had a vision or a dream?
Yes.
If you count the burning bush as a vision, potentially.
Now, I'm trying to remember, was it a vision that Moses saw Aaron coming to him, or was it God telling Aaron coming? I think God told him.
I think God just tells him, yeah.
Okay, never mind. I'm trying to remember if that was a vision or...
Yeah. Yeah, he says he's coming, and then I think he looks out and says, I don't remember. But it's not clearly a vision. Moses, yeah, his communication with Moses it's distinctly different. And how does God say how does God say he does communicate with Moses? He says face to face. Does anyone have something that doesn't say face to face? Mouth to mouth. Now, that sounds weirder, but it's important because the idea is the message comes in the form of words that come from God's mouth straight to Moses' mouth. Okay? Face to face sounds like a friend. We're just talking to each other. But that's not what it means. It means from God's mouth to Moses' mouth. He speaks directly to him, and then Moses speaks to the people. So Moses' authority as a prophet, Moses is a prophet, but Moses is much, much more than just a prophet. He has this close personal relationship with God, and he pronounces the words from God directly. He hears them. Like in a conversation, not through these dreams that need to be interpreted or through these mysterious visions like we've seen with some of the other prophets that we've seen. When God spoke to Abraham, how did he speak to Abraham? In dreams and visions. With Joseph, famously gets dreams, right? Okay, you see the distinction that God's making here? There's a big distinction. Now, I hadn't thought about this before, but one of the commentaries that I was looking at made the point that the Hebrew layout of the Old Testament, which goes the Pentateuch, also known as the books of Moses, right? Or the Torah, okay? All of those names refer to Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? That's the first division. The second division is the division of the prophets. Now, they don't divide the books exactly the same way we do, and we've talked about that a little bit before. The prophets is going to include the prophets, as well as all of the books of history. Okay? So you got the prophets. So that's going to be the major prophets, the minor prophets, and history. And then you've got the writings, which is your books of poetry, a couple random books, including the book of Esther, the book of Ruth. Okay, a few random things are included over here. But the way these are arranged is basically in form of inspiration. They're all inspired, right? They're all equally inspired. But the way in which they are written is a little bit different. Moses has this closest direct communication with God. And this is the law, okay? None of this is law. They don't, if they want to know what the law is concerning a matter, they don't go look to see what Daniel says, they look to see what Moses says. In the New Testament, when they talk about the law, they're talking about the law, right? The prophets don't usually, there's maybe a couple passages where this is the case, but they're not referencing other prophets, are they? Are they telling, is Daniel telling people to go pay attention to Isaiah? No. What's he telling people to listen to? The law, to Moses. So Moses has this highest level of authority and represents this very direct communication, mouth to mouth. The prophets are receiving their messages in visions and dreams, right? The writings have a great deal more personality in them. For example, the books of Psalms and Proverbs that are inspired but have a lot more like personal insight. You know, think about like Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is inspired, but it's a first-hand account and explanation of how to live a life that is not full of vanity, right? So the approach is different across this spectrum, even though all of these books are equally inspired and are still the Word of God, okay? So that was just kind of an interesting thing I wanted to bring out. And I think that maybe helps when we're reading the Old Testament to understand how to handle certain books. But Moses has this closest relationship, of course. And yet, what is Moses' attitude about this relationship? What did we read? It says he was very humble. And in fact, he was humbler than anybody else. Now, what was just described to us is the man who has the closest relationship with God in the entire world. And he's humble about it. I was thinking about something the other day. When Jesus was a little boy, did people think he was unusual? Now, I'm thinking specifically about the part where he didn't sin, because he didn't begin his miracles until he was an adult, right? He doesn't begin, his first miracle is turning the water to wine at Cana. But until he's 30 years old, he's living a normal life. But he isn't sinning, right?
And his mother thought he was unusual.
His mother thought he was unusual. Now, that might have been because he said weird things.
Well, there's also,
Because he said, I mean, he's in the temple having a conversation with the...
there's that, there's, when they first took the temple to offer the pearl dust, and people were saying, well, now I can die.
Right.
I've seen
I mean, she's given enough information to know that he's unusual, right? And she's also told exactly who he is, right? The child that is within you is born of the Holy Spirit, right? So she's got more insight into this matter.
And in the latest, at the wedding of Cana, she knew he could do it.
Well, that was his mother.
Yeah, his mom knew exactly he could do it.
Right.
And the water to wine, well, I don't know if she knew it was the water to wine, but she told the servant to do what he did.
Yeah. So, okay. Yes, his mother has special insight, but outside of his mother, there are, every once in a while these videos come across my way of this child in India. Okay, it's always in India for some reason. I don't know why. But there's this child in India who is worshipped by her entire community. Have you ever come across one of these things? Yeah, there's these children, and they were born in an unusual way, or they've got some unusual physical characteristic, and everyone says they must have been blessed by the gods, or maybe even this child is divine, right? Jesus doesn't catch a following until he starts collecting followers. And that's very interesting to me. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but I want you to think about this. Jesus doesn't catch attention for being perfect. I mean, he's the only sinless person who's ever lived, and he doesn't catch attention for it. People don't follow him because he's sinless. They follow him because he's interesting, or he tells interesting stories, and because he gives them free food. Okay, that's why people follow him. Obviously, the true disciples follow because they believe he is the Messiah. But people are not following him because he's perfect, right? That's not what gets people's attention. And Moses he's not dramatic about being the most humble person or about having this special relationship with God. And I think there's an insight here, and that is twofold. One is personal. You don't have to wait till you have the feeling that you're close to God to be close to God. I think there are a lot of people who are convinced that if they get close to God, they're going to have a feeling that surpasses all other feelings. And I'm not just talking about a peace, right? Because the New Testament does talk about that, right? But people expect to have some kind of deep feeling. Or we expect that the people who are the most holy are going to have a kind of aura about them that we'll be able to detect, to know that they're special and holy. And I don't think that's true. I mean, Aaron has the most visible role, but he is not a humble man. He's a proud man. If he wasn't a proud man, he wouldn't be angrily approaching Moses about this, would he?
I get the idea that, Miriam and Aaron sent up Moses, but if God had chosen them over him, I think he would have been just fine.
Yeah.
He's humble enough, and he wants to serve God enough that if God decided they were equal or that they were somehow relevant to him, he wasn't true.
Yeah, and I mean, that's another lesson. I mean, there's a lot of lessons here. I mean, I know there's a lot to dig through to get to these lessons, but I think these lessons are very rich. Does Moses seem concerned about what's going on with Miriam and Aaron? But they sure seem concerned about Moses. And I think this is another hallmark of someone who is holy. Oh, yes, I would definitely describe what they're doing as petty. Well, one piece of wisdom that I've read from a few Christian sources is that the more time you spend thinking about and mourning over your own sin, the less time you have to worry about what other people's sinning. Because Miriam and Aaron apparently aren't too busy thinking about what's going on with their lives. or they'd be working on some things. They're too busy being concerned about what's going on with Moses. Meanwhile, Moses, he was just worried about his relationship with God. Now, if you're investing in your relationship with God, which is hard and it takes a lot of time, how much time will you have to be meddling in other people's lives? Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to encourage one another and check one another as necessary. The New Testament talks about all those things. But generally speaking, our spiritual attention should probably be on ourselves, not on every other person. I think that's a big lesson to pull out here. The only other thing, and I know we're over, I just want to mention this because I want to finish chapter 12 and not have to talk about it next week or 3 weeks from now. I won't be here next week or the week after. But the last thing I want to mention is think about all of this that God says about Moses and that we find out here about Moses' special relationship. God speaks to him mouth to mouth. He's more humble than anyone else. And then connect that with Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 18. Okay? Deuteronomy 18:18. You need to know that verse. I'm not saying you have to memorize the words, but you need to know where it is. You need to know this passage. This is the passage where God says, through Moses, the Lord your God will raise up a prophet like me. And when he comes, you will listen to him. You need to listen to him. This is clearly a prophecy about Jesus. And I want you to think about the relationship that God has with Moses, mouth to mouth, and the relationship that God has with Jesus. That when Jesus comes, he does not experience God in visions and dreams. Right? He does not receive words that way. He receives words directly. Now, what's interesting, in John chapter 17, when he's praying, he talks about the words that you have given me. And I don't know how, if God spoke to Jesus through, if the Father spoke to the Son, like a voice coming from heaven, if it was like that. I suspect it was more intimate than that even. But you have this relationship that can't be compared with any other prophets. And we don't always think about what those details are and how the prophets receive their revelations, but God makes a big point out of it here. Because the thing about visions and dreams is they're hard to interpret. They require a second layer of interpretation. Even if you have this ability to interpret, you still have to go through this interpretation, right? But anyway, Moses doesn't have that, and Jesus doesn't have that either. Any comments or questions? I guess we don't really have time.
I was just going to say that this is a moment that they are getting that same direct speech.
Yeah.
Whether they got that before or not.
Yeah.
That this moment, he's not mincing words, he's not visioning.
Yeah, that's true.
He's not giving them a mystery. He's telling them point blank flat out, just like
Yeah.
Moses. But all the other things, Moses is using.
Yeah.
And this may be the only time they get that. I don't remember.
Well, I mean, if I was going to bounce off of that a little bit, or counter a little bit, they're not then passing this message on. So that makes it a little different from what happens with Moses where, thus says the Lord your God, like we do see with the other prophets where there's the redirection of the message like we have at Sinai where God gives him the message. Presumably Moses memorizes it, comes down and reiterates it.
Not every word God says to Moses is that.
That's true.
There's a
That's true.
conversation.
That's true.
There's a whole bunch of whys and how.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. Although we do get it. It ends up eventually.
Well, yeah, goes to the difference.
Okay, this is a good class. This is fun. It's hot in here. Yeah, no, it's 75.